Hi, John from Flying Chimp Media here. If you're thinking about reopening your business, you've got questions. The good news is we've got answers, and we're going to give them to you right now. Joining me on this webcast is Ivelices Thomas, the CEO and founder of HR and Beyond, and she is my go-to subject matter expert on all things requirements, safety, reopening. I send people to her because she's got the answers and I don't. But if you want to know about blogging and SEO, Ivelices, you know who to go to, right?
That's right.
All right. So, Ivelices, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to talk with me and our audience. So I asked you to try and focus. Again, we were just saying in the green room a second ago, we could go on for hours talking about this because it's a moving target, right? Everything about this is a moving target. What are maybe, if we could focus it to the top 3 areas that a business, an employer needs to consider when they're planning to reopen, and they have to plan. It doesn't just happen by itself.
Absolutely. And it starts with a plan, and it's a plan that needs to occur before you start opening your business and before you start bringing your employees. So it's so important. And like you said, we were talking about this. This can really be a topic that we can go on for hours talking about.
You'll have to promise to come back.
Absolutely, because there's so many important things to discuss, but it's a new world and it's a new reality, both for business owners and employees. So it's important to be very thoughtful when we're thinking about reopening, especially as we in South Florida get closer and closer to that. So what I tried to do is really capture the few minutes we'll be talking about on probably one of the most critical things that you should think about before you reopen. And like I said, it should be a plan, and it should be a written plan with some of the things that we're going to talk about today.
Great.
So as we get started and as we start thinking about, okay, now we're reopening. So one of the things you really need to think about is, will you need to reconfigure your existing workplace, right? Now with the coronavirus still exists, right? Nothing has changed. And we're still going to need to have physical distancing. We're beyond social distancing because we're going to be social. We're going to be at work. We're going to be in offices. And to what extent we are is really going to be up to the employer to determine. So, you know, looking at your existing floor plans and your office, if you're in office space with desks, do you have an open floor plan where people are sitting next to each other closely? Probably not conducive to physical distancing. Probably your employees will not be comfortable with that. So do you need to change your configuration? Do you need to move tables further apart? You need to invest in dividers. I know several businesses that are investing in such things.
Sure.
If you're a service-oriented business that serves customers, how are you going to keep physical distancing between your customers and your employees for everyone's safety and comfort? If you're a restaurant, right, we're talking about you may be able to open at 25% capacity or more, depending on where we land, but your table setup, how are you going to distance your customers and your tables so that they feel comfortable with the physical distancing being sufficient? So looking at your space where your employees will be, where your customers will be, how that interaction will take place is probably one of the first steps before you even think about reopening.
So I mean, you literally would have to work with some kind of floor plan, even if you drew it on a piece of paper. Let me ask you this. Now, you're not old enough to remember, but they used to have the smoking section on an airplane.
Right.
All right. You probably heard about it. Your parents told you about it, grandparents. So there was this magical line that could move on the flight depending on who booked smoking and non-smoking.
All right.
Where there was the imaginary dividing line between the non-smoking section and the smoking section. And magically the smoke would not go from this air to this air.
Right.
So when you say, you know, well, I've got desk. I mean, we're not having closed. A lot of people don't have their own office.
Right.
That's kind of a thing from the past.
Yeah.
The true open floor plan, I'm not a giant fan of. It's very noisy, but whatever. A lot of people do it because it's the density. if I had a divider between me and the next desk, but I go to the same kitchenette, I go to the same bathroom, I go to the same door, I walk in and out of the same conference room, is some of this just theater that we're doing? Is some of this just like throwing magic dust? Or I mean, is it going to make a difference?
Well, I think honestly, it's about employers and businesses making that best effort, right? Because the reality is there's only so much that anyone can do because we're going to have to go back to reopening our society and interacting with each other, right?
Right.
So that's what businesses are right now trying to figure out everywhere is what is that best effort, right? To attempt to promote as much physical distancing and as much sense of safety within their workforce and within their customers. So, you know, you bring up a good example, you know, does it make sense to continue to keep open collaborative spaces, right? Or spaces where people usually congregate, like if you have a lunchroom.
Right.
Does that make sense? Probably not, because it's going to be very difficult to maintain any type of physical distancing or monitoring of kind of that space and that interaction. So those are decisions you need to make. Does it make sense? Will people be happy about it? No, but there are a lot of things that people are not going to be happy about because the reality is work has changed and will continue to change as this pandemic continues to evolve. So
well, I think you've hit on two really key things. I want to call them out. I want to give them a name. First of all, I think people, employees and employers have to resign themselves to accepting risk mitigation, not elimination.
exactly.
There is no such thing as risk elimination in this game, okay? Yep. If you want to reopen, if you want to drive revenue, we're going to have to open the curtain a little bit. And when we open the curtain a little bit, a lot of good can come in and some bad may come in too. But there's no elimination. We're risk mitigation. And even things like I pour myself a cup of coffee, you come in and pour yourself a cup of coffee. We're 6 feet apart. We're 5 minutes apart. We both touch the same coffee pot. You could lose your mind. But
absolutely.
I think something that I keep hearing, and I think you've nailed it, when we talk about moving forward, it's forward. Right. It's not backward. And what I mean by that is people keep saying when we go back to normal, we are not going back to normal. No. There's a new normal we're going to have to embrace. I had to go out and wear a mask just to go pick up something in the parking lot curbside. I had to wear a mask. Mm-hmm. Employers, are they expected to supply cleaning supplies? Should they have Clorox and wipes and things for themselves, for their employees, for every common area? And employees, now when you walk away from something, you have to wipe it down. I mean, are people going to embrace looking forward a new normal for the next 8 months, 12 months? I don't know. Right. And stop looking backwards and saying back to normal, because there's no going back.
No. And you're right. And you're actually leading me directly to the second point, which is
softball.
Look at that. Which is one of the other most very important topics you need to prepare for is what are going to be your health and safety practices in the workplace when you reopen your doors, right? What is going to be your process? You need to have a plan. It can't just be, oh, we're going to clean. No, you need to have what are going to be your sanitation procedures? Are you cleaning before the workday, during the workday, after the workday, all of the above, which probably your employees would want to know that you're doing all of the above throughout the process. Are you hiring a company? Are you hiring people to do that that you didn't have before? Because, you know, pre-COVID, most businesses probably didn't have cleaning people come till the end of the workday. And most of the time, all they did was probably vacuum the carpets,
empty the garbage can, and that's
empty the garbage cans, and that's it. That's not sanitation in our post-COVID reality, right? Nope. So what is going to be your cleaning and sanitation process? What are you going to do during the day to make sure that you're limiting as many things? Like you said, having your example, having a community coffee pot probably not going to be a good idea. You know, just like I heard you know, the CDC isn't recommending buffet restaurants reopen. It's that same idea, right? Where you have so many people touching the same thing. But think about it now. I was always
suspicious of those.
I know, right? Before COVID, so you can imagine.
So, not going to mention any names. But.
Even thinking about the realities of what people have to do, a copy machine, right?
Right.
Offices have copy machines that people need to use. So what are you going to do? Are you going to maybe try and centralize those that make copies and then establish a sanitation process that happens after
this is my button pusher.
Right. Absolutely. Right. To limit the touching. Are you going to require people wear masks during the course of the workday if it's unavoidable that people are in certain proximity towards each other?
And who is to provide the PPE? Wait a minute. You know, this has been an issue. Amazon workers were going to strike. Instacart said, ho, I'm getting paid down here, and somehow I have to bear the cost of gloves and masks when they are jacked up in price. If you can get them at all, now it's a little bit easier, but you know, a month ago you couldn't.
Right.
So if you say, I expect my employees who aren't even customer facing, if there is a customer in your business, you know, that comes in the office, to wear PPE, which sucks after a while, by the way. I mean, breathing through that, you know, I don't know how nurses do it all day, but they do.
I know.
Newfound appreciation. But if you're the employer and you put a protocol out, which I think is wonderful and responsible, who bears the cost of the supply that you say has to be used? And who sets the standard if you don't supply it? If you don't supply it and I stick a sock around and you go, that's not an N95. And I go, I don't have an N95. Like it's a double-edged sword. As soon as you set a standard, you then have to facilitate reaching that standard, don't you?
Well, and it depends, and that's a very lawyerly answer. You know, I'm also a labor and employment lawyer, but it really does depend. It depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on where you live and work, right? Certain states already have laws in place where if an employer mandates a certain tool, right, and this could be seen as that, or a certain uniform or certain whatever, in order for them to perform their job or report to work. In some states, the employer is required to provide that, right? Some states or localities have already begun to pass COVID-specific regs that touch on that, right? Florida is not one of them as of yet. So in the state of Florida, yes, you can say employees, you know, you have to wear, if you're in this area, or all employees, you have to wear some sort of facial covering, then they do, and they need to provide it. But it's similar to, then comes the question, okay, so are you going to be very specific about it? Because now you're causing a little bit more of an issue, and most employers are probably not going to want to or should do that. In my opinion, employers should provide it. Right?
Right.
But it should be, so for instance, I have a client I'm working with now, and they're going through that same issue. We're working through, okay, what is our plan going to be? And are we going to require people to wear masks? So we're going to recommend it in this case, especially in certain areas, but those that are customer-facing employees, we're going to provide it for them. The client is going to provide it. Because why? Because those are the ones that are having more interaction and will be more at risk, right? Of being not able to keep necessarily complete physical distancing. But the other employees that work in the office and are either in an enclosed cube or aren't necessarily next to other people, yes, we're going to recommend you wear a mask. We're not going to provide it for you unless you say that you have no other way of obtaining a mask, then we will provide it. So we've kind of layered it, right? So that it's still a responsible employee. We're still meeting the needs of the employee. And that's what employers and businesses are going to need to understand, that it's going to be now more important than ever to demonstrate your employees that you are understanding that this is something that will be very challenging, and that you're willing to meet the needs of your employees and be very employee-centered in the decisions that you make. Because a lot of the decisions are going to be very challenging for employees to accept. You know, even think about the new normal, right? Before, if you worked in an office, How many times do you have people ordering takeout? You have delivery people that show up, they drop off things to the reception. Sometimes they take the elevator. Are you still going to allow that? What are you going to do about third parties? You really need to think about that. Is the receptionist going to be happy that she has to accept deliveries, touch things all day, meet with people all day? Does that make sense? So it's a lot.
So we go back to risk mitigation, and
Yep.
what you just said, the segment you just said, comes down to one word: leadership.
Absolutely.
Right? And the employee, I personally think most employers don't know more about this and how to do this than the employee does.
Yeah.
I just think they don't know, because we don't know.
They don't.
I see a health expert, a virologist on TV, whatever they are, and they go, we're learning something new about it every day. Well, once you put that out there, and I'm a layperson, and my boss is a layperson, and your boss is a layperson, and you go, all right, so we're in this together.
Right.
We should make good decisions together. Somewhere the employee is saying, if you're asking me or inviting me, making it possible for me to go back to an office in a new normal, that employer has to find leadership because they don't know anymore.
Absolutely.
So, and it sounds like you're providing that to some. I mean, where does a company go to make a plan,
Right.
to have an analysis, to know what the law is, or just what's to do right by their employees? Most employers want to do right by their employees. Most employers don't want their employees sick. Most employers don't want employees getting customers sick. I mean, like, we don't want anything to do with this, right? I mean, most people are like that. So, but where do they find a leadership when there's a vacuum of reliable information?
Right. So it varies, I think, dependent on the size of the business.
Okay.
Right. So if you're a larger business, you're probably dealing with your human resources department, which is important, right? Because those are your people focus. And then also, which we won't touch on today because that's a whole larger conversation, there's a lot of employment legislation that has come out as it relates to COVID as well that businesses need to be aware of. So having that conversation and planning with HR from the employee perspective is also important. A larger business may also have health and safety people. They usually have outside counsel. So it's a collaborative conversation, right? But what happens is when you're in that small to medium-sized business space, which is most businesses in the United States.
Right, that's the majority. 80% are small businesses.
80%, absolutely. You don't have access to those resources often, so you really need to seek them out because you're not going to have them internally. So like you said, someone like myself, I'm an HR consultant and I happen to be an attorney as well. So I work with my clients with that and also seek out what other resources we would need, whether it be a health and safety expert, whatever it may be, to make sure that we have a multidisciplinary conversation and ensure that we're kind of touching on all of the needs from the business perspective and from the employee perspective. So I recommend that employees don't try and figure this out themselves. I often tell, even before COVID, when it came to HR or labor and employment law, please don't learn it through Google. Because Google is great. I Google everything. But when it comes to making decisions about your business that may be regulated, may have financial impacts, may lead to litigation, which there will be a lot of that as a result of, post-COVID, you want to make sure that you are dealing with experts in relative fields from a substantive perspective.
I hear that. I looked up on WebMD last week. My stomach hurt. Looked it up on WebMD. Turns out I'm pregnant. So, surprise.
I know.
But so let me ask you a little bit of a pointed question. I noticed a lot of CPAs that I'm connected with, through different social media lines, are doing little webinars on how to deal with PPP, how to apply for it.
Right.
How to make sure that you're going to spend it properly and track it. Are people in your space doing the same kind of thought leadership, getting out there and holding webinars and stuff? Is that something that I could sign up for? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a few for a variety of
Right.
organizations. So there are different associations. A lot of human resources specific organizations and even law firms are holding webinars because, again, this is a very employee focused and employment law focused issue that we're going to be dealing with as businesses reopen. Um, Another example, so for instance, next week I'm going to be presenting with SCORE. We're
Right.
going to be presenting specifically on this topic, the things that businesses need to consider when they or before they reopen, and then considerations once they reopen as well, because it's not going to end just because you come up with your plan and you've written down how you think you're going to reopen and how you think you're going to manage. It's going to be completely different once you're actually operating. And this is fluid. There's so many things that are changing with the law, with this pandemic, with this all over the place. So it's going to have to be a constant dialogue that you have and kind of just reassessing, and just having to pivot a lot. I think there's going to be a lot of
Right.
pivoting from how you operate your business to how you manage your employees. I mean, which leads me to the third, I think, topic of the three that I was going to cover today
Right.
is how are you going to make the decision to bring your employees back, right? Who are you going to bring back, right? How are you going to use an objective criteria, which is preferred? I know some people might just instinctively think, well, everyone's talking about employees that are at risk or higher risk. So I'm not going to bring back my older employees yet because they're the ones that are at risk, which may be a very well-meaning thought, but actually leads you down the path of discrimination and or disparate impact if your older employees are the ones that are negatively being impacted because they're not being brought back. So thinking thoughtfully about who you bring back, thoughtfully about do you need to bring back 100% of your workforce? Probably not in a lot of cases. Again, work is changing.
Yep.
Businesses have realized that guess what? Employees can be productive working from home. And they've been doing so under very challenging
Right.
circumstances with kids at home,
Right.
while at the same time helping them with their schooling. Yet I'm sure a lot of businesses will tell you that employees have been productive. So having that thoughtful analysis and evaluation of who do I bring back when, using objective criteria, who can still remain working remotely, right? That is going to continue to be productive and doesn't negatively impact the business, and analyzing the impact of the decisions that you're making to make sure that you don't have that disparate impact, maybe of, negatively impacting your older employees or negatively impact your, employees that are mothers, right? Or however it may be. So making those thoughtful decisions, and then what are you going to do when you reopen, right? Even if you decide to reopen, can you stagger start times,
Oh,
right?
that's a good idea.
Maybe you don't have to bring everyone back in from that standard 9 to 5, right? Maybe
Right.
you have a group of employees start at 8:30, you have another set start at 9, another at 9:30. That way you're staggering when people come and you're staggering when people leave.
Right.
So these are all different things that I think we need to start thinking about work differently, right? Because like you said in the beginning, we're not going back to normal. This is a new normal with a lot of considerations we never had to consider before this period of time. So being prepared and being thoughtful and creative on how you can accomplish those things is very important.
So you touched on something, and I want to kind of come back to it in that segment, which is um, how an employer should be evaluating which employees and when they come back. There's a whole range of accelerated risk factors, enhanced risk factors. Age is just one of them,
Mhm.
just one of them. And then it turns out when you look at the whole list of people who were smoked, could have smoked 20 years ago for what, doesn't matter, whatever it is, about 60% of the US population falls into some of that, including overweight, which is also like 80% of the US population.
Right.
And I don't know that the shutdown has made that any better. But you see what I'm saying? If they say, well, obesity, oh, 60% of Americans are obese. Well, that cuts out 60% right there. So Then we then go back to kind of classic HR, which is what is the employer's right to know health risk about an employee and genetic screening and this and what was it going to be used for and who gets access to it. So it's a thorny road to walk down. It's a minefield. And I think employers would be very wise to bring the employees into that conversation and ask them who's first of all, who's comfortable coming back into an office environment, who feels safer right now, who can stay home if they want to. Lots of people would love to go back to an office or retail, wherever they were. Lots of people would love to go back. But they also have to be honest. I could look at an employee and say they have no risk factors, except for they take care of an elderly parent down the street or in their house. I wouldn't know that. Like there's so many things at play. Do you think the employer needs to bring the employees into that conversation?
Well, I think it's always a good idea to engage your workforce in a dialogue when you're making decisions, right? But I think that the key to it is understanding of what your goals and how you intend initially to accomplish them, right? Because you don't want it to be a free-for-all and say, hey, everybody, what do you think we should do? Because then it looks like, one, you have no idea
right. Well, no.
what you're doing. But yes, it's important to engage them in a dialogue because you want to make them feel as though they're part of the process, especially something that's going to be so challenging, not just being told what to do. But you have to be cautious in the conversations that you have because similar to, you brought up whether high risk or any type of health information, the employer has no right to inquire into those things, right? So, or make assumptions based on them, right? Because in the decisions that they're making. So it's recommended, do not use the high risk factors at all in making the decisions that you're making. However, in your evaluation of, who can work remotely, whatever, once you've come up with your objective criteria, number one, you can engage your employees in a dialogue and say, hey, we're coming with our plan. This is the framework of how we're going to look at things. We'd like to engage certain categories of work that we've determined could possibly continue to work from home and see how those employees feel about it. And then you engage them in a dialogue because at that point, you've already established the framework. You've established an objective criteria. You're looking at categories of work that could be done remotely. And then you can engage them in dialogue and see there may be people that say, well, actually it would work for me to work from home because I have kids and there's no summer camp and I won't have anyone to care for them. And okay, let's see, yeah, maybe we can accommodate that. Or, you know what, my kids are home, I'm dying to get out of here, right?
It could go either way.
It could go either way. So engaging in a dialogue helps, but you have to be very cautious. As an employer, you need to have a plan, right? And then you can engage your workforce in a dialogue. But at the end of the day, you can use the most objective criteria possible. It's important to, at the end, once you make those decisions, to look at the impact of those decisions because your decisions may be very well-meaning and very objective with no discriminatory intent and no use of high-risk factors or whatever it may be, but you may unintentionally be impacting one segment of the population more than another. And that's what we call disparate impact, which means even though there wasn't a discriminatory intent, you're still discriminating against a group or class. So it's a very thoughtful process and dialogue which is why it's important for businesses to engage professionals as they plan these things. Because if you look at anything in the news already, employment litigation has already started and it will only rise when we're talking about health and safety from OSHA, discrimination, all kinds of employment litigation is going to be on the rise because this is a very uneasy, uncharted territory for both businesses and employees.
Absolutely. With that, I've taken enough of your time. I do appreciate it. I know you're super busy. If people want to see if there's maybe a webinar or something you're doing or an event, best place to find you, LinkedIn?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I will always post events that I'm participating in, and I often share as well other events that I listen myself because I'm learning too. This is something that's changing every day. either I participate or am learning and watching myself. So find me on LinkedIn, Ivelices Thomas, and you can see what we're up to.
Great, great. I'll be sure to tag that when I post this so people can find you. I think you are a tremendous wealth of information and thought leadership. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to share it with us. And I feel honored. Thank you very much, Ivelices.
Thank you.
And I will hopefully talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right, take care. Thank you.